Hello everyone, my name is Roya, and I read a whopping 16 books this month, and that's insane. So I did talk about 6 of them already in my part 1 wrap-up, so this is part 2, and I'm going to be talking about the remaining 10. So I read War Girls by Tochi Onyebuchi. This is about a futuristic Nigeria, about 150 or so years from now, and it follows 2 sisters and their different stories and what happens to them, and it's really awesome. The ideas in this was really unique. However, some of the technology did require some suspension of disbelief on my part, which was kind of weird. Like, for instance, one girl has like nanobots in her spit, and I kind of wondered like how the heck would that work even, but this is a really, really good and unique book, and I really liked it. Timekeeper by Tara Sim. I didn't enjoy this one quite as much. This was like a 3-star read for me. So this takes place in an alternate reality of like early 1900s in England, and every town has a clock that kind of controls it. So if the clock like has something happen to it and it breaks or anything like that, the town stops in time. And so it's very, very interesting. It follows a boy whose father actually went to a different town to fix their clock and got stopped in time for like, and it's been like 3 years since then. So it's really, really interesting. And then it follows his romance with a boy who is a clock spirit, and he basically has to hide the fact that he's in a relationship with a clock spirit from one of the clocks that he's fixing, from all his like people who also repair the clocks and all of that. So I did think the concept of this was so interesting, but parts of this were just a slog, especially the first half of the book, and there was a lot of stuff that went unexplained and didn't make a whole lot of sense, but I definitely do think that this is still a really good read. Hull Metal Girls by Emily Skritsky. This is about 2 girls who become cyborg people to basically join their fleet's fighting force, essentially. And one of them does it to feed her family, and the other one does not have any recollection of making that choice at all. She just wakes up as a cyborg person and doesn't know why she would have made that decision, because she's like a privileged rich girl. So I really enjoyed this book. However, I did feel like, since it's so short and it's a standalone, there was a lot of world building that was missing from this, but overall I would still really highly recommend it. I definitely really enjoyed it. The Blood of Flowers by Anita Amirazvani. This is about a carpet maker girl in like the early, way back when in Iran, and she moves from a small town to a big city, and she has no dowry. Her father's dead. She has like no prospects at all. So she and her mom move in with some relatives, and the only marriage offer that she really gets or anything is from this guy who only contracts her for like a 3-month temporary marriage. So the only way that her family will like avoid starvation is for her to keep the guy's interest and keep him renewing the marriage and getting the money, that sort of thing, so that she can keep making that money and keep her relatives wanting her and her mom to stay with them. Otherwise, they literally have no place to go. And then all the while, she's trying to make carpets and kind of carve out some kind of independence for herself. And then meanwhile, the one friend that she's made in the city is actually, and she ends up having to marry that guy permanently, but she doesn't know that the main character is in a temporary marriage at all, let alone that it's with that same dude. So it's definitely a really interesting book, and I really liked it. Then I read Together Tea by Marjan Kamali, and this is about a girl who grew up, who spent her childhood in Iran, but then at age 10, she moved to the US with her family. And then at age 25, she's in business school, but she really wants to be an artist, and she decides to go back to Iran to visit. So what's weird is that the entire summary of this book only talks about the romantic subplot, which is actually a very small part of the book. So I think that's really weird. This is basically essentially billed as like a romantic, like fluffy thing, and it's totally not. So this book has some really great quotes about kind of what's on the news and how the news portrays people, and how like people in the US are almost made to not empathize with people in the Middle East, etc., etc. And this is also really interesting in that the a big chunk of the middle of the book is entirely flashbacks to like when she was a kid in Iran. And so it's kind of weird that it starts with her at 25 and then like most of the book is about her at age 10 and then it ends with her at 25 again. Part of me does kind of wonder if it would have been a better story as just the part where she's age 10 in Iran, because I definitely enjoyed that part the most. I was not as into what was happening to her at age 25. Like, that wasn't as interesting to me. But anyway, I'm going to have a full review up of this soon. My ebook for the month was Escape to Pirate Island by Niamh Murray. This is about, this is billed as a lesbian romance, but there's very little romance between the two chicks at all. So this was a very interesting concept in that basically this rich girl has this treasure map that she inherited from her deceased father, and then the other girl is like a badass runaway from, like, she used to be like a lady, but she ran away from home. And so basically these two girls fall in love, but like it takes forever to even get there. And so essentially and then when they do fall in love, it just comes out of nowhere. And then also a lot of the writing was really over-explainy. And so like the badass chick's first impression of the rich chick is like a really bad impression. Like, she sees that she's dressed not practically at all. And we really only needed the one sentence to see how she feels about her, but instead it just went on. And I was like, dude, do we even need like 2 pages about what she thinks about this chick at first glance? Like, what's up with that? But so overall, I did think that this book was very well researched. It did do a lot of things pretty well, but it just didn't quite do it for me. Like, it was good enough that I didn't want to give it below 3 stars, but it just didn't really deserve a particularly high rating either. Then one of my audiobooks for the month, because believe it or not, I read like 4 audiobooks, and so this was The Poppy War. This is such a good book. It's about a girl who doesn't want to marry some gross old guy, so she studies really, really hard for this test to get into this elite like military school. And so she gets there, and then she's like the only one who's a peasant and a war orphan. Everyone there is like some noble's kid and whatnot. And so it follows her like through that, and then through like the war that she ends up in, and it's so interesting and all of that. There is this whole like magical aspect that the way that it kind of goes, I can see why a lot of people think this is YA, but of course it's not, because it definitely does have a lot of like horrifying imagery in it as well, which was one of the things that made me really want to read it. I love horrifying imagery. I really wanted to like read it for that, but of course it's like the last 20% that happens in, so I'm reading along and going like, wasn't there like a lot of blood and guts and gore in this? And then suddenly I'm like, oh wow, that's yeah, crazy. But yeah, it's a really, really good book, and I absolutely loved it. I also read Arusha and the End of Time. This is such a good book as well. I do, however, think that the very beginning is the best part, because it follows Aru as she is trying to impress some classmates of hers that come over to the museum that she lives in, because she goes to like, it goes through all this stuff about how she goes to this like fancy school that's like a private school, and all her classmates are like rich kids. I definitely do think this book is so, so good, but I do think that the beginning was the best part, so that kind of like raised my expectations for the rest of it in a way. I also read And I Darken by Kiersten White. This is a Vlad the Impaler retelling, where Vlad the Impaler is a girl, and it's definitely really awesome. I can't believe it took me this long to read this. Like, the chick in this is so badass in a way that like puts all other badass chicks to shame, basically, and it is just a great story, and I definitely want to continue with this series. And finally, I read Circe by Madeline Miller. This, of course, I loved because I've been obsessed with the Odyssey forever. I love that story so much. I love Greek mythology in general, so of course I loved this book. I'm hearing all this stuff from Circe's perspective, but oh my goodness, how did I not know that Circe's son marries Penelope, and then Circe marries Telemachus. Like, what? I can't believe that I didn't know that. I think that's so weird. And when I posted about that on Twitter, it turns out that a ton of people didn't know about that, so I don't feel too alone, but that still seems so crazy to me. But anyway, those are the books that I read in the latter half of the month. It's kind of insane how many there are, so I hope you'll forgive me that for not going into some kind of in-depth description of all these books, but of course I will have reviews up for at least one of them, if not more than that. But anyway, I will see you guys very soon with a new video. Bye!